Why did the room go quiet the moment she set the crate down? No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it, that uncomfortable pause when a presence doesn't match the role assigned to it. The armory smelled like cold steel and old oil, the kind of scent that stuck to your skin long after you left. Men moved around her without looking twice, boots echoing on concrete, laughter low and careless. She had been handed a rag and solvent like an afterthought. Clean the guns, they'd said, not cruel, just dismissive, as if that explained everything. She didn't argue, didn't correct them, just nodded and went to work. Her name was Kira Blackwell, though here she was only the new girl. She knelt beside a rack of rifles, sleeves rolled up, fingers already black with carbon. Her movements were precise, almost reverent, each weapon treated like something alive, like something that remembered how it had been used. She felt the weight of eyes on her back, curiosity mixed with judgment. She felt it before, in classrooms, in selection, in places where people decided who you were before you ever spoke. Ignored, that was easier than challenged. As she stripped the first rifle down to its bones, her mind drifted not to resentment but to memory. A desert range, sunburned hands guiding hers, a voice calm and patient, her father's voice. Slow as smooth, he'd said, smooth as fast. She breathed out, centered herself, and kept working. She didn't notice the commander watching her at first. Garrett Dalton had seen a lot of soldiers in 40 years. He could tell who was pretending, who was trying too hard, who would break under pressure. At first glance, Kira Blackwell looked like someone sent to satisfy paperwork, a name attached to a legacy, a risk. But then he noticed the rhythm. The way she disassembled a rifle without hesitation, the way parts landed in exact alignment, the way she checked tolerances by feel, not sight. That wasn't training, that was intimacy. Still, he said nothing, because the name Blackwell already sat heavy in his chest. He told himself he was imagining it, told himself the past stayed buried for a reason. But when one of the sergeants leaned in, joking under his breath, and froze mid-sentence, when his face drained of color, Dalton knew something had shifted. "What is it?" Dalton asked. The sergeant didn't answer right away, just stared. Then he said quietly, "Sir, you need to see her arm." Dalton stepped closer. The sleeve had ridden up as she reached for a bolt carrier. Ink curved along her forearm, not decorative, not symbolic. Earned. The trident. Below it smaller, sharper. DVGRU. The room seemed to tilt. Dalton's breath caught before he could stop it. That mark didn't belong to anyone who cleaned guns because they were told to. It belonged to people who had walked into darkness and come back changed, or not at all. "Kira Blackwell," he said slowly. She looked up. Her eyes were steady, green, tired in a way youth shouldn't be. "Yes, sir." "Where did you earn that?" She didn't posture, didn't smile. "Coronado," she said, "then everywhere else." The silence stretched. And in that silence, Dalton understood something he hadn't allowed himself to consider. They hadn't been ignoring her. They'd been underestimating her. And that mistake was about to cost someone dearly. Why would someone with nothing left to prove choose to say nothing? That question followed Kira long after the armory emptied. She finished the last rifle alone, hands aching, shoulders stiff from old injuries. Outside, the base settled into its nighttime quiet, generators humming, wind brushing against corrugated metal. She stayed where she was, because silence had always been her shield. If she spoke too soon, they'd ask why she was here. And that answer wasn't simple. It wasn't clean. It carried grief and unfinished business, and a promise she had made to herself at a graveside under a folded flag. Her father hadn't died because he was careless. She knew that with a certainty deeper than evidence. When Dalton finally returned, his voice was different, lower, stripped of command edge. "Why didn't you tell us who you were?" Kira wiped her hands slowly. You didn't ask. That tattoo changes things. Only if you let it. He studied her then, not as a subordinate, but as something closer to an equal, a survivor recognizing another. Your father saved my life, Dalton said, years ago. She nodded once. I know. You're here because of him. Yes. And because something went wrong. Her jaw tightened just slightly. Yes. She told him then not everything but enough, about intelligence that didn't line up, about a mission that felt staged, about names that vanished after Afghanistan, about a message sent too late to save anyone. Find the truth. Dalton listened without interrupting. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. This operation, it's been too clean, too convenient. That's how traps feel, she said. A pause. Then we assume it's one. From that moment on, she wasn't the new girl. She was the quiet center of the storm. What do you do when the enemy already knows you're coming? The answer revealed itself on a frozen road, engines idling, headlights off. A blockade that wasn't official, vehicles placed with intention, men who weren't supposed to be there. Someone had whispered their route into the wrong ear. Kira felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the echo of another convoy, another night, another betrayal. Alternate route, she said. Old road, Soviet era, it'll be hell. Dalton didn't hesitate. We take it. Hell turned out to be slow, brutal, and quiet, the kind of quiet that made you think too much. By the time they reached Overwatch, the truth was waiting. A face on a rooftop. A voice from memory. Wyatt Thorne. The man her father had trusted. The man who had disappeared. The man who smiled when he saw her through a scope. Everything in her wanted to pull the trigger. But something held her back. Because this wasn't just about killing him. It was about understanding why. When the ambush came, it came fast. Lights, fire, chaos, training took over. Rounds flew, orders snapped. And someone went down. Maddox, the joke-making sergeant who had underestimated her first. She watched him fall. Watched life leave him. And something inside her broke, not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly like a bone snapping under pressure. They escaped with wounds and losses and no vehicles. They could have left. They didn't. Because some truths don't wait. What does justice cost when revenge is the easier answer? The compound loomed like a concrete scar against the snow. Kira crawled through a culvert, heart steady, mind clear. Fear was there, it always was, but it didn't drive her. Duty did. Inside, darkness became their ally. She moved like her father had taught her, unseen, unheard, deliberate. Bodies fell. Not in anger. In necessity. When she stepped into the central chamber and saw the device, real and waiting, something cold settled in her gut. And then Thorne spoke. He tried to justify it, to explain betrayal as survival, to reduce her father to a mistake. She let him talk, because words reveal more than silence ever does. When he armed the bomb and ran, she made her choice. She didn't chase him. She ran to the device. Because that's what her father would have done. Hand steady, mind focused, time bleeding away. Dalton cut wires, trusted her instinct. The timer stopped with seconds to spare. And somewhere in the building, Thorne fell alive, captured, exposed. Justice didn't come with fireworks. It came with restraint. What remains after the noise fades? Dawn broke pale over the extraction zone. Helicopter blades cut through cold air. Medics moved fast. Bodies were covered. Names were spoken softly. Kira sat alone, shoulder bandaged, staring at nothing. Dalton approached. You could have killed him, he said. I know. You chose differently. She nodded. So did my father every day. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not a legacy, not a symbol, but a woman who had carried grief without letting it rot her. "You finished what he started." "No," she said, "I continued it." As the helicopter lifted, she felt the weight ease just a little. Not gone, never gone. But lighter. Because truth had been spoken. Because silence had meaning. Because dignity didn't need permission. Sometimes strength doesn't shout. Sometimes it kneels in the armory, cleans the weapons, waits. And when the moment comes, it acts. Why did she stay quiet when she could have ended the doubt with a single sentence? The question hung in the air long after the armory lights dimmed and the last pair of boots disappeared down the corridor. Kira Blackwell remained kneeling on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by neatly arranged weapon parts that gleamed under fluorescent light. Everything was cleaned, everything was ready, and yet she didn't move. Silence had always been easier than explanation. She wiped her hands slowly, deliberately, as if time itself might slow with her. Outside, the bass settled into its night rhythm, generators humming, distant radio chatter, the muted clank of metal as men prepared for something they pretended was routine. War always dressed itself up as procedure before it revealed its teeth. She leaned back against the weapons rack, exhaling through her nose. Ignored. That familiar feeling pressed against her ribs. Not anger, not yet, but something quieter. The ache of being unseen, of being reduced to a task instead of trusted with intent. She felt it before. During Bud S, when instructors watched her longer than the others, waiting for her to break. During DEVGRU selection, when silence followed her name on the roster. During deployments, when allies underestimated her until it was too late for apologies. She could have spoken up, could have corrected them the moment the rag touched her palm, could have said who she was, what she'd done, where she'd bled. But that wasn't why she was here. Kira stood, rolling her shoulders slowly. Pain flared, old and familiar, a reminder that her body carried more history than most people would ever know. She didn't resent it. Pain was proof. Pain meant survival. The armory door creaked open behind her. She didn't turn. Lieutenant Blackwell. Garrett Dalton's voice. Older now, roughened by years and ghosts. She'd heard it before, once faintly, through a hospital curtain 3 years ago when a man with steel-gray hair had stood silently at her father's funeral. "Yes, sir." "You didn't tell us who you were." She faced him then. Her posture was relaxed but her spine straight, not defensive, not apologetic. "You didn't ask." Dalton studied her like a man rereading a map he thought he knew by heart. His eyes flicked, almost involuntarily, to her forearm, now covered, as if the ink beneath the fabric still burned through. "That tattoo," he said, "you know what it means to men like us." "I do. It changes expectations." Only if expectations were wrong to begin with. The words landed heavier than she intended. Dalton didn't bristle. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing something unpleasant but true. "Why stay quiet?" he asked. Kira hesitated, not because she didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud made it real. "Because I needed to see who you were before you knew who I was," she said finally. "And because this mission matters more than my resume." Dalton's jaw tightened. "You think something's wrong. I know something is." The armory felt smaller now, like the walls were listening. "My father didn't die because of a bad call," she continued, voice steady. "He didn't walk into ambushes blind. He taught me better than that." Dalton said nothing. "He suspected a leak," she said. "Someone close, someone trusted." The word hung there, trusted, sharp as a blade. Dalton turned away, packing once, then back again. "Intelligence on this operation came from channels I don't like," he admitted. "Too clean, too convenient." "That's how traps feel," Kira said quietly. A long silence followed. Then Dalton exhaled, slow and controlled. "You should have been briefed with the rest of the team." "I was," she replied, "just not officially." Something flickered in his eyes, respect maybe, or recognition. "All right," he said, "then unofficially tell me what you see." She stepped closer to the table, tracing invisible lines in the air as if satellite imagery hovered there. Her voice shifted, calmer, sharper, the voice of someone who had lived inside operations long enough to feel when they were wrong. "This isn't just an exchange," she said. "It's a draw. Someone wants us here, wants operators on the ground, wants eyes off something else." "And your father?" Dalton asked. Her breath hitched just slightly. "He found the pattern before anyone else did." Dalton nodded once. "Then we assume this mission has a second purpose." "Yes. And we plan accordingly." For the first time since arriving, Kira felt something loosen in her chest. Trust wasn't given easily, but it had just been offered. Sleep came in fragments that night. Kira lay on her cot staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of a base pretending to rest. Every creak, every distant footstep set her mind moving. She wasn't anxious, not exactly. Anxiety was messy. This was focused. Determined. Her father's voice surfaced again, uninvited. "Never rush the moment before action," he'd said once. "That's when mistakes are born." She breathed slowly, grounding herself. Images came anyway. Afghanistan, dust in the air, radio static, a voice cutting off mid-sentence. The flag. She rolled onto her side, eyes burning. Broken didn't mean useless, it meant honest. At 400, she rose quietly and dressed without turning on the light. Outside, frost coated the ground, turning the world into something sharp and unreal. She moved through it easily, body remembering routines even when the mind resisted. The briefing room was already occupied. Map spread, coffee steaming, men leaning in with furrowed brows. When she entered, conversation paused, not dismissive this time, but attentive. Dalton glanced up. "You're early." "Didn't sleep." "None of us did." They stood shoulder to shoulder now. No jokes, no smirks, just professionals circling a problem. As plans formed, Kira noticed the shift. Questions directed at her, eyes waiting for her input. Respect earned not by declaration but by clarity. Still, part of her stayed guarded. Trust was fragile. And she hadn't yet told them everything. Because there was one detail, one name she hadn't said out loud. Not yet. The convoy rolled out at dusk. Engines low, lights off. The landscape swallowed them whole. Kira sat between two men who no longer pretended she didn't belong. One of them cleared his throat. "Your dad," he said carefully, "he was legendary." She nodded once. "That's a lot to carry." She looked out the window, watching frozen fields slide past. "I'm not carrying him," she said. "I'm walking beside what he left unfinished." The man absorbed that, then nodded. The road ahead curved into darkness. Somewhere beyond it waited answers and consequences. Kira checked her weapon one last time. Ignored once, never again. Not because she demanded to be seen, but because when the moment came, she would be impossible to overlook. Why did her pulse stay calm when everything else screamed danger? The convoy slowed just before the tree line, engines dropping to a low growl as if the vehicles themselves sensed what waited ahead. Snow lay undisturbed on either side of the road, smooth and perfect in a way that felt wrong. Too clean, too untouched. Kira Blackwell watched it through the reinforced glass, her reflection faintly visible, eyes sharp, jaw set, mind already ahead of the moment. This was the feeling she trusted most. Not fear, not adrenaline. Recognition. She felt it before missions that later made headlines and others that never existed on paper at all. The quiet certainty that something was about to break, and that when it did, Only preparation would matter. "Hold," Dalton's voice came through the comms. The vehicle stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and unnatural. Even the wind seemed to pause. Kira was out of the door before anyone told her to move, boots sinking into the snow, rifle steady in her hands. She scanned the road ahead, then the tree line, then the high ground. Shapes resolved into patterns, patterns into intent. There, civilian SUVs, expensive, out of place. Not random. "They're watching," she said softly. Dalton joined her, binoculars raised. "Checkpoint." "No," she replied, "screening position." That word carried weight. It meant someone was filtering traffic, waiting for something specific, waiting for them. A knot tightened in her stomach, not panic but memory. Afghanistan had started like this too. "Someone talked," one of the men muttered. Kira didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth had already settled in her bones. "Alternate route," she said. "There's an old road, Soviet era, north by 2 clicks. It won't be on most maps." Dalton lowered the binoculars and looked at her. "You sure?" "No," she said honestly, "but I'm sure this one's compromised." That was enough. They turned off into terrain that punished mistakes. Broken pavement gave way to ice-choked dirt. Branches scraped against metal like warnings. The convoy crawled forward, every meter earned. Inside the lead vehicle, the air was tight with unspoken thoughts. "Cold like this changes things," someone said. "Slows reaction time." "Only if you let it," Kira replied. She adjusted her gloves, flexed her fingers. Her father had trained her in worse. Alaska, Norway, places where cold wasn't weather, it was an opponent. The road narrowed, the trees pressed closer. And then the radio crackled. "We've got a tail." Kira turned, peering through the rear window. A single vehicle, lights off, maintaining distance. "They want us to know they're there," she said. Dalton's jaw clenched. "Why?" "To keep us moving," she answered. "Forward toward the objective. Toward the trap." No one argued. They dismounted 2 kilometers out, leaving the vehicles hidden and vulnerable. Kira slung the heavy rifle across her shoulder, muscles adjusting automatically. This was the part that separated intention from consequence. From here on, there were no retries. The warehouse complex emerged through the trees like a relic that refused to die. Concrete, rust, shadows, the kind of place secrets chose to rot. Kira dropped prone, snow soaking into her gear, and brought the scope to her eye. The world narrowed. Figures moved below, too many, too organized. "This isn't an exchange," she whispered. "It's a reception." Dalton heard it in her voice, the certainty, the edge. Teams split, Overwatch established. And then she saw him. At first it was just posture, the way he moved, controlled, familiar. A man who didn't need to prove anything. Then the light shifted and his face came into focus. Kira's breath caught. Wyatt Thorne. Her father's protege. The man who had stood at their table, laughed in their kitchen, listened as her father spoke about honor and restraint and the cost of command. The man who had vanished after August. Her hands tightened around the rifle. "Dalton," she said, voice steady despite the storm inside her. "The controller on the roof, I know him." Silence on the line. "Name," Dalton said. Wyatt Thorne, former SEAL, DEVGRU, listed as missing, AWOL. The pause that followed was heavy. "I suspected," Dalton admitted finally. "I didn't have proof." Rage surged hot, sharp, but she swallowed it down. Anger clouded judgment. Her father had taught her that lesson early. Before anything else could be said, the lights came on. Brilliant, blinding. The night exploded. Gunfire tore through silence. Men scattered, orders overlapped. Kira's rifle roared, recoil slamming into her shoulder as targets fell through the scope. She moved automatically, breathe, fire, adjust. Beside her, another rifle answered in rhythm. Below, teammates scrambled for cover. This wasn't chaos, this was orchestration. And Thorn was conducting it. You always were predictable, his voice boomed over speakers, mocking, intimate. Especially you, Kira. The sound of his voice twisted something deep in her chest. She tracked him, waiting for the angle, waiting for the moment. Then the explosion hit behind them. Fire bloomed where their vehicles had been. Shockwave rolled through the forest, knocking snow from branches. "No evac," someone shouted. "We're on foot." Thorn laughed. "Your father taught me well," he said, "especially about contingencies." Kira lined up the shot. Thorn stepped into view. She squeezed. And he moved. The round missed by inches. He vanished. Retreat was ordered, controlled, violent. Kira fired until her barrel burned, buying seconds with every shot. Then someone went down. Hudson. Old, tough, unyielding. Without thinking, she ran. Shots cracked past her. Pain flared as a round tore through her shoulder, but she didn't stop. Pain was information. Deal with it later. She reached Hudson, dragged him back inch by inch, muscles screaming. Dalton appeared, firing, covering. They made it barely. But not everyone did. When the smoke cleared, one voice was missing. Maddox. The silence where his reply should have been pressed against Kira's chest like a weight. They ran until there was nothing left but breath and blood and cold. Behind a fallen tree, Dalton counted survivors. One dead, multiple wounded, no vehicles, no support. Every rational choice screamed retreat. Kira looked back toward the compound, jaw tight. "He's the leak," she said. "All of it, my father, Maddox. This wasn't random." Dalton met her gaze. "I know." They stood there, exhausted, broken, alive. And in that moment, Kira understood something with painful clarity. This mission was never about stopping a weapon. It was about confronting betrayal. And some truths demand a return, no matter the cost. She checked her remaining magazines. The night wasn't done with them yet. What do you do when walking away would be safer, but staying feels inevitable? The question settled over them as they crouched in the tree line, breath turning white in the dark, blood stiffening where it had soaked into fabric. The forest felt closer now, branches bent inward like witnesses that refused to look away. Somewhere behind them, the compound still hummed with distant generators, unaware, or pretending to be. Kira pressed her back against the trunk of a fallen pine, fingers slick with her own blood as she tightened a field dressing around her shoulder. The pain was sharp, honest. It kept her present. She welcomed it. Maddox was gone. The realization didn't hit all at once. It crept in slowly, like cold through wet boots. One less voice on the net. One less shadow moving in sync. One less weight when Dalton counted heads. No one said his name. They didn't have to. Dalton knelt in the snow, map spread over his thigh, jaw set in a way that meant he was thinking past the obvious. Retreat was doctrine. Survival was logic. But logic had never accounted for men like Wyatt Thorne or for women like Kira Blackwell. "We're compromised," someone said quietly. "Outnumbered, injured." All true. Kira stared at the dark outline of the compound through the trees. She could still hear Thorne's voice in her head, calm and amused, like he was already telling the story of how this ended. Her father's voice followed close behind. "Don't confuse safety with surrender." She stood before she realized she was moving. Dalton looked up. "You shouldn't be on your feet." "I know," she said, "but listen to me." The men watched her now without interruption, without doubt. Blood loss and exhaustion stripped everything down to essentials. Truth mattered more than rank. "He didn't just set a trap," Kira said. "He's finishing something. Whatever's inside that compound, it's time sensitive. He wouldn't still be here otherwise." Dalton's eyes narrowed. You're saying this isn't over. I'm saying Maddox didn't die for a distraction. That name finally landed. One of the men looked away. Another clenched his fists. Grief moved through them in quiet, contained ways, professionals mourning in real time. Dalton folded the map slowly. Options. Kira swallowed. Her mouth tasted like iron. We go back, not loud, not fast. We don't chase him, we corner the truth. A pause. This isn't about revenge, she added. If it were, I wouldn't trust myself to speak. Dalton studied her face. He saw the anger there, but he also saw the restraint holding it in place. All right, he said at last, we move. No one argued. They left the wounded with a concealed relay and minimal defense, a decision that sat heavy on all of them. Every step back toward the compound felt like stepping against instinct, against everything training told them to value. But training hadn't prepared them for betrayal that wore a familiar face. They approached through a drainage culvert half buried under snow and debris. Kira went first, ignoring the way her shoulder protested every movement. Water soaked through her gear, cold enough to numb skin, but she focused on her breathing. Slow, controlled, alive. Inside, the air changed. The smell hit her first. Electronics, fuel, something metallic underneath. Not a warehouse. Not really. They emerged into a sublevel corridor lit by intermittent emergency lights. Concrete walls, reinforced doors, purpose-built. Not a black market site, Dalton murmured. No, Kira agreed. Something older. They moved deeper, clearing rooms with quiet efficiency. Offices long abandoned. Terminals wiped clean. Evidence erased with care. Someone had wanted this place forgotten. They reached the central chamber without resistance, and that was what frightened her most. In the center of the room sat the device. It wasn't dramatic, no blinking red lights, no cinematic countdown, just a compact, heavily shielded unit wired into a portable control system. Power steady, status indicators calm. Too calm. Kira stepped closer, heart pounding, not with fear but with recognition. This isn't a bomb, she said. Dalton looked at her sharply. Then what is it? She swallowed. A relay data burst, encrypted. Whatever it sends once. After that, it burns itself out. Where? Someone asked. She shook her head. Doesn't matter. What matters is who receives it. The answer came from behind them. You always were quick, Thorne said. His voice echoed softly through the chamber, almost conversational. He stepped into the light, hands visible, no weapon drawn, calm, confident. Like a man who believed the ending was already written. Kira turned slowly. Up close, he looked older than she remembered, harder, lines carved by decisions he'd stopped justifying. You should have stayed away, he said to her almost gently. Your father did at first. Something inside her cracked, not outwardly, not violently, but enough that she felt it. You used him, she said. Thorne sighed. I tried to save him. You lied to him. I told him the truth he could survive. Dalton shifted, rifle trained on Thorne's chest. You're done, Wyatt. Thorne glanced at him, unimpressed. You think this ends with me in cuffs? His eyes returned to Kira. This isn't about power. It's about correction, about making sure the right people stay invisible. Kira laughed once, sharp and humorless. You sound afraid. For the first time, something flickered across his face. I sound realistic, he said. The world doesn't reward restraint anymore. Your father believed it did. Her hands clenched. He believed in responsibility, she said, in choosing who you become when no one's watching. Thorne shook his head. That's why he lost. The words hit her like a blow. Before she could respond, Thorne moved, faster than she expected. His hand slammed down on the console. Alarms didn't sound. The device simply came alive. Kira lunged. Shots rang out, concrete chipped. Dalton tackled Thorne to the ground, the two men crashing hard. Someone yelled, someone fell. Kira reached the console, fingers flying despite the pain, despite the blood dripping onto the keys. Timer running. Not loud, not dramatic. Relentless. I can stop it, she said, voice tight, but I need time. Take it, Dalton shouted. Thorne broke free long enough to look at her, eyes burning. You don't even know what you're stopping. I know what I'm choosing, she replied. He laughed once and ran. Not away. Deeper. Let him go, someone yelled. Kira didn't look up. She couldn't. Every second mattered. Her hands moved by instinct, memory, training layered on grief. Her father had taught her systems not because he loved machines, but because he believed understanding prevented destruction. She found the override. Cut power here, reroute there. Sweat stung her eyes. Timer dropping. Dalton's voice came through strained. He's arming a secondary charge. Let him, she said. This is the real threat. Her fingers hesitated for half a second. In that pause, she thought of Maddox, of Hudson, of the father who had believed one good choice could ripple outward. She made hers. The device powered down. Silence fell. Not relief. Just stillness. Dalton returned moments later, breathing hard, weapon raised. He's gone. Kira slumped back against the console, chest heaving. I know, she said softly. Because some enemies don't disappear when you want them to. They disappear when the truth finally catches up. And tonight it had started to. What remains when the noise fades and the adrenaline finally lets go? The question arrived quietly, slipping into the space left behind when the alarms died and the echoes of gunfire dissolved into nothing. The compound felt hollow now. Not safe, just emptied of urgency. The kind of calm that followed something irreversible. Kira Blackwell sat on the cold concrete floor with her back against the disabled console, helmet resting beside her. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the delayed release of everything she'd held together. Blood had dried stiff along her sleeve. She didn't look at it. Across the room, Dalton stood still, staring at the doorway where Wyatt Thorne had vanished. A man like Thorne didn't run without reason. He ran because time favored him, or because he believed it did. We should move, someone said, before he circles back. Dalton nodded slowly, but he didn't take his eyes off the shadows. He won't. How do you know? Because he got what he wanted, Dalton replied, or thinks he did. Kira closed her eyes for a moment. Not all of it, she said. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. The burst didn't transmit. That got their attention. She pushed herself to her feet, wincing as pain flared through her shoulder and down her arm. It was primed to send more than data, she continued. It was a test, a signal to confirm reach. He'll try again somewhere else. Dalton exhaled slowly, meaning this isn't over. No, she said, it never was. They moved out in controlled silence, retracing their steps through the corridor, senses stretched thin. Kira walked point despite the protests. Pain slowed reaction time, but awareness mattered more. She felt every footstep, every shift of weight, every breath. Outside, dawn had begun to bleed into the night, a pale, uncertain light creeping over snow-covered ground. The world looked almost peaceful. That bothered her more than the darkness had. They regrouped at the extraction rally point with the wounded. Medics worked efficiently, quietly. No wasted motion. No unnecessary words. Maddox's absence was a weight no one could ignore now. Someone had covered his body with a poncho. Kira stopped when she saw it. She hadn't cried during the firefight, or when the device powered down, or when Thorne escaped. But standing there, watching frost gather on the edge of that poncho, something inside her finally gave way. She crouched, resting a gloved hand lightly on Maddox's shoulder. "I should have gotten there faster," she whispered. Dalton knelt beside her. He didn't contradict her. He didn't offer comfort dressed as logic. He just stayed. After a long moment, she stood and stepped back. Grief didn't need an audience. The helicopters arrived late, later than planned, rotors chopping through the thin morning air. As they lifted off, Kira watched the compound shrink beneath them, already beginning to look insignificant. That was how it always happened. Places that felt enormous in the moment became footnotes with distance. She didn't feel victory. She felt tired. Inside the aircraft, Dalton sat across from her, eyes heavy. "You could have taken the shot," he said quietly. "On Thorn." "I know. Why didn't you?" Kira looked down at her hands, steady now, despite everything. "Because killing him wouldn't have stopped what he started, and because I didn't want his choices to decide who I become." Dalton studied her for a long moment. "Your father said something similar," he said. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "He said a lot of things people didn't listen to." "I did," Dalton replied, "too late." The helicopter banked toward base, the horizon widening. At the medical bay, Kira sat through examinations and questions she barely registered. Stitches, painkillers, documentation, the machinery of aftermath grinding forward. She answered when spoken to, nodded when necessary. When it was over, she found herself alone in a quiet corridor, fluorescent lights humming overhead. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Broken didn't feel dramatic. It felt dull, like exhaustion that reached into the bones. She thought of the life she'd built before this mission, the distance she'd put between herself and everything that reminded her of her father. She told herself she was done chasing ghosts. And yet here she was. Dalton found her there. "Command wants a full debrief," he said, "and they want you to stay." She opened her eyes. "Stay. This unit, this fight, whatever shape it takes next." She considered it. "I didn't come back for a post," she said, "or a role." "I know." She straightened slowly, "but I won't walk away either." Dalton nodded. "That's all I needed to hear." As he turned to leave, she stopped him. "Sorry." He paused. "Thorn not done," she said, "and when he resurfaces, he'll expect me to hesitate." Dalton met her gaze. "Will you?" Kira shook her head. "No, but I won't rush either." Later, alone in her quarters, she removed her gear piece by piece, each item placed carefully on the bunk, not ritual, respect. She caught her reflection in the mirror, the same face, older eyes. Still standing. She traced the edge of the tattoo on her arm, not with pride, not with regret, but with acceptance. Strength hadn't come from proving anyone wrong. It had come from choosing restraint when fury would have been easier. Outside, the base stirred back to life. New missions, new noise. Kira sat on the edge of the bed and breathed. The fight wasn't finished. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't running from it. She was walking toward it. With clarity, with grief, and with the quiet resolve to decide her own ending. Why does the hardest part always begin after the mission is declared over? The question followed Kira Blackwell in the days that came after, lingering in the quiet spaces where gunfire no longer drowned out thought. Paperwork replaced weapons. Debriefs replaced adrenaline. Faces blurred together as people spoke in careful, measured tones, dissecting decisions as if they were numbers instead of lives. Maddox's name appeared in reports. Her father's name surfaced in classified footnotes. Wyatt Thorne's name remained unfinished, marked unresolved. Kira sat through it all, back straight, hands folded, answering when asked. She gave facts, not feelings. That was expected. That was safe. What no one debriefed was the silence that followed her back to her quarters each night. She woke before dawn every morning, not from nightmares but from habit. The body remembered even when the mind wanted rest. She'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the base coming alive, boots on concrete, doors opening, radios crackling. Life moving forward. She wondered if Maddox's life would still be moving forward somewhere else if she'd run faster. If her father would have made a different call with one more piece of information. If Thorne ever woke up with the weight of his choices pressing on his chest the way hers did. Guilt didn't scream. It whispered. One afternoon, Dalton asked her to walk with him along the perimeter. No ranks, no agenda, just movement. Snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of earth beneath, scarred, uneven, real. "You know command will spin this," Dalton said after a while. "They'll say the device was neutralized, threat reduced." "And it will be," Kira replied, "until it is." Dalton nodded. Thorne built something bigger than himself. "Yes," she said, "and he needs people like him to survive." They stopped near the edge of the fence, looking out toward the open land beyond the base. "I didn't tell you everything," Dalton admitted. Kira waited. "Your father came to me months before he died," Dalton continued. "He said if anything happened to him, you might show up one day asking questions." Her throat tightened. "He said you wouldn't ask for permission," Dalton added, "and that you'd probably scare the hell out of everyone by being quieter than expected." A small, sad smile crossed her face. "That sounds like him." "He trusted you," Dalton said, "with his unfinished work." Kira looked out at the horizon, eyes stinging. "I wish he'd trusted me sooner." Dalton didn't respond. Because some wishes arrive too late to be useful. That night, Kira went to the armory again. Not because she needed to. Because she wanted to. The room was empty, just as it had been the first day. She moved down the racks slowly, fingertips brushing cold metal. She stopped at a rifle she hadn't touched since before the mission. Her father's old configuration, maintained out of habit more than policy. She broke it down carefully, cleaning each piece with the same patience she'd learned as a child. The act grounded her, gave her something solid to finish. Halfway through, footsteps echoed behind her. She didn't turn. "You don't need to do that," Dalton said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but I choose to." He leaned against a crate, watching her work. "You could leave," he said. "After action leave, counseling, a clean break." Kira paused, bolt carrier in her hand. "And if I do?" Dalton considered it. "You'd still carry this, just somewhere quieter." She nodded. "That's what I was afraid of." She reassembled the rifle, smooth and sure, then set it back into place. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I don't even want justice the way people usually mean it." Dalton raised an eyebrow. "What do you want?" She turned to face him. "I want responsibility to mean something again," she said. "I want the people who make decisions to feel their weight, even when no one's watching." Dalton studied her, not as a commander, not as a subordinate, but as someone measuring whether the cost was worth it. "You know this path doesn't end cleanly," he said. "I know," she replied, "but clean endings are a luxury." Weeks passed. Thorne didn't resurface, not publicly, but fragments surfaced. Whispers, disruptions, networks collapsing without explanation, quiet victories that never made headlines. Kira became part of that quiet. Not the face, not the symbol. The presence. She trained, she planned. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, people leaned in. Not because of her tattoo. Not because of her father. Because she was careful. Because she remembered names. Because she didn't forget the cost. On the anniversary of Maddox's death, she stood alone near the training field at dusk. No ceremony, no speeches, just wind and fading light. She placed a small stone at the edge of the field, a marker only she would recognize. "I didn't save everyone," she said softly, But I didn't stop trying. The words felt enough. Later that night, as she prepared for another deployment, she caught her reflection again, tired, scarred, steady. She no longer felt invisible. Not because people finally saw her, but because she no longer needed to be seen to matter. The world would keep breaking itself in familiar ways. People like Wyatt Thorne would keep convincing themselves they were necessary. Systems would fail quietly before they failed loudly. And somewhere in the middle of that noise, Kira Blackwell would keep choosing restraint over rage, responsibility over ego, action over announcement. Because strength didn't need an audience. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.